3 tips to help you crochet amigurumi. Hi there, I'm Cilla from Cilla Crochets, and I'm here to cheer you on throughout your own crochet journey, no matter what stage you're at. In this video, I'm going to share 3 top tips with you to help you make amigurumi. These are tips I've learned from past experience of crocheting and designing amigurumi, so I hope they help. They are tips very much so for beginners or beginners looking to improve their amigurumi making skills. So if you're an intermediate or advanced crocheter, you probably already know these tips. But if you're a beginner and you're looking to improve those amigurumi crocheting skills, I hope you hang around for these 3 tips. I hope they help you, and I'd love to hear what you think. Tip 1 is to keep track of your stitches and rounds. So this may seem like a really obvious tip, but hear me out. So each amigurumi, in particular if you're making animals, but anything that is worked up in the round is made up by different shapes. So you're making 3D shapes, and to make the 3D shapes, you use a specific number of stitches and rounds to get you the shape. So shapes here, for example, you've got like a triangle at the end, you've got a tube that, starts thicker, goes inwards. You've got a bit of a, I want to say a sphere, but it's not really a full sphere. A sphere, stomach, triangles for ears. So every time you make an amigurumi, you're making different shapes, different 3D shapes that all go together. So to make those shapes, you need to be aware of how many rows or rounds that you're crocheting and how many stitches are in each round. So if you miscount, you'll change the shape, which, for example, if you're making 2 identical ears, you don't want each of the ears looking different. Or if you're making 2 arms, you don't want those looking different. Sometimes it can have a really minimal impact if you mess up the stitch count or mess up your row count. But a lot of the time it is quite noticeable. And if you're trying to get the same result the crochet pattern designer has gotten, it's important that you follow their instructions. So how do you keep track of stitches and rounds? So I'll start off by talking about how you keep track of the stitches in each round. Now, I highly recommend using a stitch marker. Now, there are loads of different types of stitch markers you can buy online. I'll show you some of the ones I have because there's lots of different types. They all do the same thing, but you don't need to spend money. You can also find things around the house that you can use instead. So, for example, this is a stitch marker here, another one here. So you can get really pretty looking ones. They're quite fun to, I made that one. So you can make them, you can buy them. There's really simple ones. I really like these metal clip ones. Often you actually find these when you buy clothing, new clothing. Sometimes these type of pins are attached, like the tag is attached to the label, using these, but these are great. They're metal pins, basically. Safety type pins. There's lots of different types here. Now, as I said, you can use things around the house. You don't have to spend money. So you could use a little bit of yarn. You could use a bobby pin, like a hair clip. You could also use a paper clip. So anything that can be inserted under the stitch. So you want to put it into the first stitch of the round, and all that helps you do is keep track of when your round starts and ends, and then you count the number of stitches at the end of each round. So you put this in at the beginning of the round so you can see where the round starts, and then when you reach it at the end of the round, you've finished the round. And that allows you to go back and count the stitches in the round to make sure it matches up with whatever the pattern says. So you don't leave these in, you take them out for each round that you are crocheting. So you put it in, you crochet the round, you take it out, then you put it in again, crochet the round, take it out. And that is how stitch markers generally work. Now, to keep track of the number of rounds you're doing. So obviously that's like the length of the piece that you're crocheting, the height, it creates the height. Now there's lots of different ways to do this. I used to use a really old-fashioned way of using a notebook and a pen, and I would, when I was crocheting a piece, so let's say I was crocheting this arm here. This is Ruben the Red Panda, by the way, one of my own crochet designs. But if I was crocheting this arm, I would write down, so in a notebook, the name of the pattern I was using. I would then write the name of the crochet piece I was crocheting, so in this case it's an arm. I would then write down all the row numbers, or round numbers I should say. So say if there was, I'm just pulling a number out of thin air, but say there was 24 rounds in this arm, I would write 1, 2, 3, 4 all the way to 24 in my notebook. And then as I crocheted each round, I would just put a big X through each one, and that would keep me on track as to where I was at with crocheting the arm. Now, there are lots of little gadgets you can also buy that help you do this. I do have one that I use now. You can actually see there's a number on it. I should turn that off. But this one just sits on my finger, and I literally just press the button and it counts the rows as I crochet. So it's a little bit more electronic. It works quite easily. There's also old-fashioned, like, I shouldn't say old-fashioned, people still use them, but there's ones that you can stick on your crochet hook. I think it's mainly used for knitters a lot, but they have little toggles either side, and it's just a counter, so you turn the end of the toggle and it counts. So these are just called round or row counters. If you search on Amazon, I got mine on Amazon, I think it was, I don't know, £2 or something. It was really cheap. I could be underestimating that price, don't count on that, but it was a cheap item to buy, and it is useful. However, it doesn't work for everyone. I honestly found writing in a notebook the easiest way for me when I first started crocheting. Other than that, though, there are apps you can use as well. So I've got a few. I'll put them in the description below. I'll put their logos up here as well, just in case you're interested in trying them. They're all free. I've tried them all, but for me, I'm just not good at sticking at keeping track of different apps and things on my phone. I've got too many as it is. So for me, now I just use the round counter, but also I often am a little bit lazy and don't do it at all. I just manually count each time. But when you're starting off, don't do that, because it's difficult. Because I remember when I first started out, I found it difficult to count the rows, to be honest, especially when you don't know where it starts and ends. And when you're brand new, that can be a bit challenging. So don't be harsh on yourself. Do it the easy way. Write it down, or use a row counter or an app or anything, just so you've got something to come back to and you're not panicking when you come back to crocheting your project, because it's very rare that you will crochet an amigurumi all in one go. So that is my tip number 1. Keep track of your stitches and rounds. Tip number 2 is to put your increases and decreases where the pattern says they should go. Now, this may seem a bit of a strange tip to say, but I think it's really important to explain that your increases and decreases can very much so change the way your amigurumi shape appears. I've got a really good example of this. This is the Beaming Banana. It's one of my crochet designs, and you will notice that the shape curves. The way it curves is not from any pipe cleaners or wires or anything like that, but it's literally just because of the stitches I've used. So the placement of the increases and decreases in this shape creates this shape. So if the increases and decreases were put in different places than what they were written in the pattern, you wouldn't get the same shape, and it would probably turn out looking pretty strange. So that is why I highly recommend making sure that you follow the written pattern, if you're following a written pattern, and you put those increases and decreases where the pattern says they should go, because it can very much so impact the shape of your amigurumi parts. Now, as you get more advanced, you can play around a little bit more with that. But when you're starting out, that is my top tip if you want to make something that looks like the designer's version of the pattern you're using. So that is my tip number 2. Put your increases and decreases where the pattern says they should go. Tip number 3 is to use an invisible decrease. So an invisible decrease is a special technique for when you're decreasing in the round, and it does what it says on the tin. It tries to make the decreases look invisible, not noticeable. So I'll give you an example of this. This is my second ever amigurumi that I made. It's Edward the Elephant, and he is from Sarah Zimmerman's crochet pattern book called Crochet Cute Critters. I highly recommend it, and I'll link to it in the description. But if we look closely on Edward, I'm going to try and find an example. Hopefully you can see that okay, but that little bit of extra, it looks a bit thicker than the other stitches. That is a normal decrease. So I'll show you a couple of them. That's one. There's another one there. I'll show you another one. There's another one there. Hopefully you can see the difference between the one I'm pointing at and the other ones around it. So it just looks a little bit different. And it can be quite noticeable. So that's an example of just using a standard decrease. So it can be seen. Whereas on my little Pip the Penguin, so this is one of my crochet designs, I use the invisible decrease. I'm going to try and show you a good example. I think here, I mean, you can slightly see a diagonal going down. That's where the decreases are, but they're a lot less noticeable than like the thicker stitch, if that makes sense, of the decrease that was in Edward the Elephant. So that is the difference between using a standard decrease and invisible decrease. Now, I will do a proper tutorial video on the invisible decrease at another point in time, but for the meantime, I'm just going to talk through those steps. But as I said, I will film a proper tutorial on this technique soon, so stay tuned for that. But for now, doing an invisible decrease, what you do is you insert your crochet hook into the front loop only of the 2 stitches you're joining together. So you do front loop of the first stitch and then front loop of the second stitch. So you'll have 2 front loops on your hook. Then you'll yarn over and pull through the 2 front loops of that were on your crochet hook. So you're yarning over, pulling through. Then you'll have 2 loops on your hook. You yarn over and then pull through those 2 loops on your hook. And that is your invisible decrease. It is a really simple technique to do. It isn't much harder than the standard decrease. And I will say that the invisible decrease is very much so meant to be for when you're working in the round. You can't really use the invisible decrease when you're working back and forth in rows, because obviously it will look very different on the back side. And usually when you're working back and forth in rows, you don't want it to look massively different from either side. Whereas when you're working in the round, there is a very obvious right side and wrong side to the work. The right side being the side that's facing you. So like this is the right side, and the wrong side is the bit that you can't see that's on the inside of the amigurumi. So just be aware of those differences. But the invisible decrease is fantastic for amigurumi, and honestly for beginners it's not that much harder to learn than the standard decrease. So if you're making amigurumi for the first time, try and give the invisible decrease a go. It will make your amigurumi just look that tiny bit neater. I hope that helps. That is tip number 3, to use the invisible decrease. So that's 3 more tips to help you crochet amigurumi. Just to let you know, there is another video on my YouTube channel that is more tips, and I will be releasing more tips as well to help you make amigurumi. I'm just doing them in short snippets because otherwise it would be a very, very, very long video. So I hope these help. If you've got any questions, feedback, comments, please do let me know below. I would love, love, love to hear from you. Now, if you've enjoyed this video, please do give it a thumbs up. And if you'd like to see more amigurumi tips, more tutorials, more of my crochet videos, please do hit that subscribe button and turn the little bell on so you get notified when any new videos come your way. Until next time, have a great week and happy crocheting.